The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm one of your hosts, James Floyd. I am a freelance writer for StarWars.com and Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I am Melissa Miller, your other host. I am also a writer for Star Wars Insider magazine, a freelance science writer. This episode, Star Warsologies, is going to chat about linguistics as represented in Star Wars by all the various alien languages. Our guest expert today is David Peterson. He constructs languages, including Dothraki for Game of Thrones, High Valyrian for House of the Dragon, and also for the new Pixar movie Elemental, among many others. Thanks for being here, David.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, David.
David, tell us a little bit about what linguistics is as a field, and then how you got into studying that and then shifting into constructing languages.
Linguistics is the scientific study of language. I think a lot of people misunderstand what a linguist is. They will often start by asking a linguist, how many languages do you speak? But that's not what linguists do. Linguists study language, very practically, very scientifically, comparing all of the world's languages to figure out how they differ, how they're the same, and what are the kind of fundamental characteristics of human language. You don't actually have to learn the full language to do that. You just need to study it kind of the same way you would any other organism. Language creation is different. You might think of it as the artistic field associated with linguistics. It's the creation of languages of all types. And you can create all different types of languages that attempt to emulate human languages, languages that attempt to be very, very different from human languages or trying to be alien, and also languages that use different modalities than we use. So you can create spoken languages, you can create sign languages, but you can also create languages that are written, languages that use, say, Legos, languages that are done with taste sensations or smells or textures, really anything. The only thing it needs to do is convey some sort of meaning, which is basically what we understand to be a language. There's got to be something you can interact with and some kind of meaning behind it. And that's what we do.
Very cool. Did Star Wars influence your decision to go in linguistics?
I wasn't aware of created languages at all until I got to college and learned about Esperanto. It's not as if I didn't grow up watching Star Wars and Star Trek and having heard about Lord of the Rings, but I watched and consumed all of this without having any kind of knowledge whatsoever or any kind of awareness that there was any creative linguistic element in it at all. The best analysis or analogy I can give, but it crucially depends on you seeing the recent Westworld, is whenever they show any of the robots something that's not from their universe, they look at it and say, that doesn't look like anything to me. And I feel like that's what must be what happened with me when I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation growing up. So I learned about Esperanto as a sincere attempt to create a universal language that everybody could use. And I found that very interesting. When I got to linguistics the next semester, I thought, well, what if instead of creating a language to compete with Esperanto, since it seems to have the market cornered there, what if I created my own language just for fun, just for my own personal use? And so I started immediately, thinking that I was the first person to ever have this idea, and I kept up with it.
Do you want to tell us about that first language?
It's forgettable. So the thing is, the first language that everybody creates is always bad because you have no idea what you're doing. Part of becoming a better language creator is learning what linguistic biases you have. In other words, when you speak one language, you kind of tend to assume that all languages must work that way until you encounter something different. For a lot of English speakers in America, if the first time they study Spanish, that's the first time they learn about gender, and they're thinking, like, what on earth? You can call a table female? How does that work? And it just kind of, a little explosion goes off in your brain as you realize, wait a minute, languages can do different things. And every time you encounter something different like that, something similar happens. When you're creating your first language, typically you haven't given much thought to this. And so what you create ends up emulating either the language that you speak or the languages that you've studied quite closely. Mm-hmm. And in my case, I was infatuated with Arabic, and the only created language I knew was Esperanto. And so the first language I created looked a whole lot like if you took Arabic and tried to regularize it in the way of Esperanto, but with unique vocabulary. And so it really wasn't very good. It was very large because I worked on it for quite some time before I realized, how poor it was. And I realized that as I started to translate Shakespeare's The Tempest. Yeah, anytime I came across a word I didn't know, I just created a new root. And I think it was something like fortification when I sat down and realized I was creating a new root for fortification. And I already had a word for fortify. And I was like, this is interesting. Like, why would I create a new word for this when it seems to be related in English? Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking, well, just because it's related in English, why does it have to be related in the language that I'm creating? And that was really kind of the first step. Like, I went and looked through my vocabulary. I had different words for boat and ship. I mean, those are just arbitrary synonyms in English that have to do with the history of the language. It's not as if they're different concepts, right? They're synonyms. And so I realized that what effectively I was doing, even though I had a unique grammar, was I was recreating the vocabulary of English in its entirety. So I really wasn't creating a language, not in the sense as we understand it now. I started a new language, hit a wall, started over, started a new one, and I started learning. Yeah.
So it was more like you reskinned the English language with different sounds.
Yeah, and a lot of initial languages are like that. So if you look at the very first languages of somebody creates, a lot of them are like that.
I do have to point out, as someone who goes out to sea on research vessels, the crew would say ships carry boats. They are actually different things. But it is some random arbitrary size something. But yeah, ships carry boats, which is how I remember the difference for those purposes. Curious about how, you interact with like entertainment then. I mean, it sounds like you sort of have your expertise in a lot of things. You have worked on Dune, on Witcher, in the MCU with Dark Elvish. So there maybe aren't a lot of shows and movies left over that you haven't worked on, but if there are, when you're watching them and someone else has created this language or people are just sort of saying random sounds, is it hard for you to watch? Does it take you out of it?
Yeah, and it's always disappointing. I mean, unless somebody is working on it that's actually done a good job. For example, I was contacted to work on Star Trek Picard, but the timing just wasn't right. So I recommended a friend of mine named Trent Pearson, who's an excellent language creator. And he created the Romulan language for that and did an absolutely outstanding job. And so it was a joy to be able to see that. But I mean, I also watch some of the stuff that I work on sometimes, and it's just cringeworthy usually because they've hired a dialect coach to work with them with my stuff. And so they always screw it up because they have no idea what they're doing.
So yeah, you're not taking it all the way to set and training actors and stuff like that then?
Sometimes.
Okay.
And the results are better when that happens, but sometimes not.
Right. That makes sense.
Are there examples of language in Star Wars that stand out to you because they're done well or because they make no sense?
I can't think of any examples of a language done well, but there are two kind of elements to this. There is the language itself, and then there is how it's used. And there's actually a phenomenon that exists in Star Wars that I think is really well done and very realistic in terms of what would actually happen. There are essentially two types of aliens, right? There's the ones that are just humans with things stuck on their heads, right? Most of the Star Trek aliens are like that. Yeah, and some of the Star Wars aliens are like that. And that's fine. There's bound to be other humanoids in the universe. But then there are also aliens that are physiologically different enough that you simply can't create a spoken language for them that could be reliably pronounced by humans. But if this were the case, like if this actually happened, what you would have is essentially two groups of people that if they were forced to, live and work together, they would develop a kind of aural, A-U-R-A-L, fluency for each other's languages. And you see this, and this is actually there are some really nice scenes in District 9 where you could see like he's thinking he misheard, the alien, where it's like, it's clear that the aliens understand English, and it's clear that the humans understand the alien language. They're essentially fluent in each other's languages, but they can't pronounce them. They just don't have the proper articulators, and it would be kind of embarrassing. And this is actually something that I don't know if it was pioneered in Star Wars. Maybe we'd seen it before, but it was certainly highlighted. You see it with the droids, and you see it with the Wookiees, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you can just imagine how like embarrassingly ridiculous it would be if you had Harrison Ford trying to go, and like say stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. It's because the whole point, it's like, I know, and we know that, humans obviously did make the sounds that Chewbacca made, but it's supposed to not be something that a human can just easily produce.
Right. There's one scene in Solo, right? I don't know if you saw Solo. There's the one scene in Solo where young Han Solo does in fact try to make those noises, and then they just agree to talk in their own languages, basically, because it is embarrassing.
It's ridiculous. And so I thought, though, that was quite realistic, because if humans and Wookiees are interacting enough, that's the situation that would emerge. Like, you would essentially understand what they were saying, and you just wouldn't bother trying to produce it, and vice versa.
I always thought that Harrison Ford did a particularly good job acting against Chewbacca, right? And I know that that's because I think Peter Mayhew did actually speak English underneath the suit, but he always had that timing down of it was clear that Han Solo knew what he was saying at the time he was saying it. Didn't take him any lag time to translate it in his head. He knew what he was saying, and he would react, appropriately and quickly. And I feel like that stands out really well. Whereas we know, on set, I interviewed the puppeteer for BB-8, and he said it sort of progressed over the course of the sequels, whether or not he was beeping at Daisy Ridley or actually just speaking English and giving her something to act against,
I worked on a show called Defiance. And
I love that show.
That was to date my favorite project that I've ever worked on. It was incredible. And also the greatest level of involvement I've ever had with, certainly with a show. But in the third season, we had, for the first time, a scene that was going to be set on one of the alien homeworlds, the ones that had been destroyed and so didn't exist anymore. It was in the past. And all of the scenes were going to be done in Castithan, one of the languages I created. And so Tony Curran was going to be playing his father. Mm-hmm. And then they hired a child actor to play Tony Curran's character, Datak, as a boy in these flashback scenes. By this time, Tony was great with Castithan. The child actor, of course, is going to be having to learn this brand new. Anyway, I didn't know this, or I wouldn't have known this, except that on Defiance, I reviewed the dailies every day when there was some of my language in it. And so I saw these scenes where there was a scene where Tony, as his father, is, admonishing the young boy, and they're both speaking Castithan. And so there are a few takes where they're going back and forth in Castithan. And then I see with a timestamp, there's some time that's passed, and they come back, and there are several new takes where the young boy is still speaking Castithan, but Tony is doing all of his same lines and acting them in English. And I realized that what had happened was that the director felt like the little boy just wasn't really getting it and wasn't able to really respond to the context. He wasn't understanding things. And so he wasn't, acting as best as he could. And so they had already gotten plenty of takes with Tony doing Castithan. They didn't need any more. And so they had him switch to English so the little boy could understand and really respond with the appropriate emotion. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. They'd never done that before in any of the scenes in Defiance. It was just the director that day. He came up with the idea, and I thought it was fantastic. And so they spliced all the scenes together. So all of it's in Castithan was done really well.
Yeah, that seems like it'd just be something now that you can put in your toolbox and say, hey, this is one way we can work around this, is basically do the Chewbacca approach.
That's right.
Yeah, because every actor is going to have a different process and different. I mean, I always feel like people's brains work really differently when it comes to languages. So I imagine that's true, amongst actors for whether or not I'm just reciting these lines and I know I'm angry versus I really understand what we're talking about here. That's cool.
Yeah. In Star Trek, there's universal translator, and so they can get by with everybody speaking English, except that they can selectively turn it off, which I always found very interesting because, periodically Worf will say something like, the Klingon word for this is, and then he says it, and it's like, if the universal translator were working, shouldn't he just be saying the same word twice?
Right.
From our perspective. But anyway.
I'd never noticed that one, but you're right. Absolutely. It should say the Klingon word for sword is sword, right?
Yep. So there's that in Star Trek. In Star Wars, it's just this unnamed passive fluency that almost everybody has. But I think that the Star Wars model actually is a really beautiful model. And I think it's something that we could aspire to and that we may be close to, but not in the sense that everybody's going to learn every language on the planet. Rather, we're getting closer with technology to where we might be able to get it where you're wearing your AirPods and you go to a different country and the microphones pick up what people are saying and repeat it to you in whatever language you want. We may be able to get to a place where we can do that, which I feel like would be a wonderful thing for this world. Right now, almost everywhere you go, you can find English speakers, somebody who speaks English because you kind of have to. It's become the de facto auxiliary language of everybody on the planet. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if you didn't have to learn any language? Everybody could go around speaking their own languages, but still understand each other. There would be no pressure to learn any language for commerce. And so then what would be left is, well, I just want to learn this language because I think it's cool. Or I want to learn this language because I would enjoy going to this country and not having to have my AirPods in the whole time,
Right.
And I think that would be a really, really wonderful future. And that's kind of just what you see, that it isn't commented on in Star Wars. Everybody, even the aliens, can expect to just kind of go around and speak their own language and expect to be understood. That's really, really cool.
I remember going back and thinking about it, I think after we talked for the Insider article, David, and realizing that in the first movie, at least, and maybe even the second one, Luke doesn't understand R2-D2. Like, Luke doesn't know binary. He's just going off of context, or when he's plugged into the X-Wing, he gets a readout or whatever. But like the rest of the time, I just had never really noticed that before, so it's always impressive to me that like Rey clearly does, on this little a different backwater desert planet or whatever. I felt like that really said something about her, that she knew, more of those languages. Speaking about technology, getting us closer to that universe, I went to Brazil recently for work with not a lot of notice. And so, I know zero Portuguese and downloaded the Google Translate app and was amazed. Like, I've done a lot of work travel to a lot of countries, but all of a sudden this technology of, if I spoke into it, it would then speak, translate that into Portuguese for my taxi driver and vice versa. I could take a picture and it would tell me what that said. Not exactly real time, but, the next, a couple of seconds later or whatever. And I was just blown away at the like, okay, I'm never going to learn Portuguese. I'm in a part of Brazil where they don't speak English. And I got by just fine. So I want this world. Definitely. It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And I had really never thought about how prevalent it is in Star Wars that people just go about speaking their own languages. Oh, we should talk about the written aspect of this too. You mentioned, the gestures and written and all sorts of chemical signals and different ways to have a language. But in Star Wars, we at least have the written with Aurebesh, which I'm still trying to learn because I think it's basically just a font.
It pretty much is A through Z, but with different letters. Usually when we see it in the TV shows now, it pretty much is just a cryptogram for English. But I think there's the potential that it had more. When it was originally formed, they had letters for diphthongs that we don't have single letters for in English, like th and cha.
Those are digraphs.
Digraphs, thank you.
Yeah, this is what's known as a cipher. So a cipher is just a different set of symbols for some other writing system. So in other words, you have to understand another writing system in order to be able to make any sense of it. It's just a code. It's basically a font. It's honestly a really bad one for so many reasons. It's just an absolute disaster.
Well,
Uh,
I look at it and I think, man, that has got to be really hard to write. That like you would think it would evolve over time
yup.
where all these lines and hard angles would just get curved out right away.
Yeah, and not only that, it's a very poor mishmash of line styles. At least there's some consistency with line width, but looking at the letter for N, it's got this slight little curve thing.
Yeah, the
That doesn't
Nern.
that doesn't make any sense. Just like the letter A, these things have names. It doesn't really matter, but
Arek.
There we
that
go.
letter A is just a disaster. You got this E letter where it's got this tiny little extra beep thing on the end, and then
Yeah, it looks
good
like
Lord, the one
graffiti,
below
like
it.
Vermont.
Oh God, this is so bad.
Yeah,
It absolutely can't be written. That's for certain, but that's not necessarily a knock against it. For example, if you look at Russian Cyrillic and you look at it in its actual printed form, nobody can really write that. It would be too tedious, but there's a different way to actually handwrite it. So that's not a knock against it.
We never really
Um,
see anyone handwrite Aurebesh, do we? Even like sign their name or anything like that I can
does
think
anybody
of.
handwrite anything?
Interesting.
I don't recall
Yeah,
that.
not that I can think
yeah.
of. Would be
You
a
do
cool little thing to see for the first time.
do see like just graffiti and stuff where somebody's spray painting stuff,
Hmm.
and it's definitely more stylized. Somebody's not working hard to make sure the right angles are
Yeah.
there, the proper lengths. But yeah, I would think that it could be that maybe Aurebesh as an alphabet works as a post-writing alphabet that, like you said, like with Russian, that nobody writes it, that this is its print format.
Yeah, that would be ideal, except it doesn't work for that either. It's just the letter forms are peculiarly not distinct enough in certain areas, and also just have these small little half-formed things there and random dots on that one. There's only one letter with dots, and it's
Yeah,
got two of them to the left.
which
Looks like
letter?
it's SH.
Oh, okay, you're
Um,
getting into the digraphs.
I'm looking at all of them. And good Lord, C is a disaster.
Oh
Like
yeah, the
just
creche.
look at that.
That's
We'll have a Aurebesh alphabet in the
Like
show notes for people. How often do you have to create written versions of the languages that you've created?
I've created writing systems, oh goodness, at this point for probably over 10 shows.
Okay.
I did one for Elemental that Jesse and I worked on, and we also created one for Vampire Academy. Those are, I think, the most recent ones.
want to say for Aurebesh is that it initially started off as kind of a garbage font that didn't have any meaning. You go back to Return of the Jedi at the very beginning, you see like these display screens of this is Vader's shuttle and here's text with it, but I don't think that text actually translated to anything. It just
Right.
was there
Yeah,
to look like text.
Yeah, I feel like
sure.
it was in
But
the age of like Easter eggs. It's like, haha, we can put random things for like the super Star Wars nerds to find if we turn this into like, a cipher.
yeah, but I want to show you something. But I want you to put it in the show notes, and I want everybody to look at this. So there's a video game called Bomberman. It started off on the Nintendo in the 80s, and it's developed a little franchise of games, some of which were very popular, where you're just this little alien type guy, and you go around setting bombs to bomb people. There's multiplayer modes, and the one of the more recent iterations of it was they came out with a version for the Switch. For this version of Bomberman, for whatever reason, they created a completely gibberish writing system that's thrown in the background. It's one of the most gorgeous writing systems I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, okay. But
Um,
gibberish.
yeah, it's total gibberish,
Okay.
but it's like it is very clear that the people who designed this understood, character weight and the way to do character styles. And so the results are really satisfying to look at. There are also different font faces done kind of throughout the thing. And yeah, it just kind of it comes together really well.
Cool.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, we'll make sure to put up that comparison in the show notes so people can see, like your real-time reaction to this, looking at Aurebesh and be like, oh God, why? Interesting. Yeah, and to my completely untrained eye, I'm like, well, what's the difference between, that nonsense and the Star Wars nonsense? But this is why we have experts on the show, is if you tell me that that's beautiful nonsense and Star Wars is frustrating nonsense, I believe you.
It's just about glyph design, because it's like there are individual glyphs, and then there's also the system. It's hard to tell with just an individual glyph if it's going to work or not. When you compare it to the rest of the system, that's where you can tell. And so, like, the one positive that Aurebesh has in favor of it is that at the very least, the stroke width, that's all consistent. So that's good. But yeah, it's not a system that can be written by hand, and it's not a system that can be easily distinguished in a digital typeface. It's not taking advantage of that medium. That is, like, if you expect a display screen, it's not taking advantage of the fact that, well, all right, if you're not going to write this, let's make these things maximally distinct, as opposed to like having these very slight little bends. Like, what are they thinking? Or looking at T versus S, like, especially if that's shrunk down in a small font, like, what are they thinking? This is not great for reading.
Look away.
And yet people do learn how to read Aurebesh, that after a while I can start picking up, and like you start recognizing the vowels, and then you can start putting the words together mentally. But yeah, it's tough. What do you think of Gungan as a language? Is it their own language? Maybe it has a different structure, or is it just kind of I don't want to say pidgin, because I don't know if that's the exact term for it, or
we don't see evidence of them having their own language there, or a separate language from English. They just speak English with peculiar accent and some language game elements. They might have their own language, but then we don't hear it. It's kind of bizarre that what they did with them. It certainly wasn't a good idea. It was a poor decision in that it makes it seem like it was trying to be imitative of Creole languages. Pidgin is a language that results in a context situation. The difference between a Pidgin and a Creole is that a Creole is a full language, a Pidgin is not. Creole has a fully consistent grammar. It has plenty of native speakers, and it's essentially a language in its own right. Whereas a Pidgin is a lot less stable and might have different elements to it. Anyway, so what they did with Jar Jar Binks, it seemed like they were trying to imitate the sound of it without really understanding what a Creole language is, which is pretty offensive. But what can you do? And also, it's not just Star Wars. Lots of shows and films do this kind of thing because they just don't really understand the history or science behind the actual linguistic elements they're portraying. It's why one of the most common things you'll see, with Arabic signage, is that it's the letters are backwards and not connecting. And so it's like, you don't even need to speak Arabic to look at a sign and know that it was done incorrectly. If you look at all the letters and they're all their, standalone forms and standing right next to each other, and you say like, oh, yep, nobody on set understood Arabic even a little bit to just be able to look at that at a glance and see it was wrong.
That's the thing I'm going to see now. See, it's once you learn it, you can't unsee it.
Did you know that there is Arabic visible in Star Wars?
Oh, really?
Great. Is
it wrong then? Probably.
No. It's probably correct because it's not supposed to be there. In the canyon scenes when the Tusken Raiders are looting Luke's land speeder, in the background on the wall is Arabic graffiti that was really on site in the valley in Tunisia. That some Tunisians at some point or other went in there and defaced the rock, as people do all over the world. And so that's the first written language you see in Star Wars.
Right on. That's pretty cool.
I'll have to go look for that. I hope it says something very rude.
It's probably something like Bob was here.
Right. Yeah. David, if there's anything we didn't get to that you want to make sure you speak about, now's a good time.
I will say this, especially with where we're at with Disney Plus and streaming. Star Wars represents what could be just an incredible opportunity for language creators everywhere. And it is absolutely, they just keep dropping the ball. It's really a huge disappointment because it's like there's supposed to be dozens of languages in the Star Wars universe. And you could actually throw a reasonable amount of money at like a dozen different conlangers, and you could flesh out these little pieces of the Star Wars universe. Like they could actually be languages that you could actually learn and use, which I know that fans of the Star Wars universe would be excited about, more so than like even fans of Game of Thrones or the Song of Ice and Fire. For the most part, they don't care about the languages. They really don't. But like the fans of Star Wars, they would. And it's like you could actually have full languages there that were official, that had the imprimatur of Disney and Lucasfilms and all that. That's something that only Disney and Lucas can do. Only they can say this thing is official. And they also have the marketing wing so that you could actually put out primers on all of these languages. They could sell boatloads of them because it says the word Star Wars on it. Like it just seems like the most obvious thing in the world. And there's so many language creators who would just love the opportunity to do this even once for anything. Yeah.
No, you're right. Because the way that they take on, the costuming groups and all that kind of stuff, pick up on, anything from Star Wars. I think you're definitely right that there would be, whole clubs. I mean, Duolingo, could have Star Wars languages on it.
Yes, it could.
I see the potential there.
Yep.
So, what is it like for you? You said mostly with Song of Ice and Fire, people don't really pick it up or whatever. But have you ever come across a fan who, at a convention or something like that, who speaks one of your languages to you?
The biggest and most active still community and the most fan engagement I've ever had was absolutely the language Trigedae slang that I created for The 100, which is a show that many people haven't heard of. And most people have certainly forgotten by now. And even those who are aware of it maybe weren't aware that there was a language created for it. But easily that was my most popular language and had the most people actively using it, and they're still using it. That was a really rewarding experience because, by and large, the other stuff I do, nobody really cares.
I know. Do you have a favorite phrase or sound or something from Star Wars that you're like, I love this phrase, even though it may not make sense as a language in a larger language, but
well, first, all the droid beeps, love them, but also the Ewoks, the little whooping they do. I thought it was just adorable. I love that.
Yeah. We didn't even get into Ewoks, and especially me being a kid of the 80s, I watched the TV show, so they would mix in
Chihuahua.
Yeah, exactly. Some of those things are the names for things. And
there was the TV show. There was also just any number of things that were produced. Like I had a record that was a Return of the Jedi, where you put the record on and it tells you when to turn the page, that type of thing. Yeah, and it was delightful. I remember, because they put, the Ewok sounds in there. It's just, it was just so nice to listen to, so woodsy and so cute. Yeah. That was really nice.
That was a great question, James. I like it. Do you have a favorite Star Wars character?
Lando. Absolutely. Oh. He was always my favorite one to watch when, from a very, very early age. Because he was always smiling, always dressed so well, and so confident, and had such a good bearing. And it's like he absolutely does betray them, but he comes back at the end, so it's all right to feel good about him. Yeah, easily he was my favorite.
But I do think that there's enough of Solo for you to like, then, if that's the case. I think Donald Glover does a really good Lando. I think he does Billy Dee Williams.
He does a really good everything.
Right. Exactly.
Very true.
I should see it.
Go into Solo knowing it's a bit cheesy and a bit campy, and I think you can still like it. Very different vibe from Rogue One for sure, though. So
that's cool. I should definitely give that a look.
Yeah, if someone's interested in getting into linguistics or the constructed languages, what would you recommend?
Well, linguistics, of course, that's a scientific study, so jump into a university, take an elementary course, see if you dig it. Honestly, the very first course that you're given at a university, it is supposed to be easy and it is supposed to be fun. If it is neither easy or fun for you, linguistics is not for you. It's absolutely not like a haymaker course like OChem or whatever. If you're not really vibing with it, then linguistics is probably not your jam. So there's that. And then for language creation, I mean, you can just start whenever you want. If you're looking for help or maybe looking for other people to chat about it with, you can go to the Language Creation Society's website, which is conlang.org. It's it's just an informational site, but it has links to everywhere. So like all the active communities on various social media platforms, all the Discords, they're all there. And then if you're interested in learning about how to create a language, my book, The Art of Language Invention, can teach you that. That's just available where books are sold.
We'll put all of that in the show notes as well.
Okay, I had a total random question. You talked a bit about like English bias when creating languages. Are there some other languages on Earth that could be learned to just like blow people's minds of like, this is how much you don't know about language because this language is so utterly different from English?
Yeah. So first, learning the grammatical structure of Arabic, you'll be totally amazed that a language could even do that. So there's that, because it kind of, you never thought until you saw something like that you could actually break down words that way and tease them apart like that. Arabic is a real eye-opener. And then especially for English speakers, something like either Turkish or Korean or Japanese, where that is very consistently head final, especially Turkish is very good at doing this, where instead of saying I saw the man that you talked to the other day, it would be like, I the other day talked to man saw you. And then there's a you somewhere in there. I left the you out. But it is essentially completely backwards of the way that we usually form very complex constructions like that. And so that's something where it's like trying to wrap your brain around it the first time. It just feels like your brain is breaking. And yet it's just perfectly natural for speakers of Turkish and Japanese and so on. So that can be something that's quite illuminating.
And those are only just spoken languages, right?
That's correct. There are a lot of things that you can do with sign languages that are just natural that you would never think of. For me, one of the ones that blows me away, and it's hard to do with a spoken medium, but everybody should know approximately how to, count to 5, right, in sign language, in American Sign Language. So crucially, the only difference is 3 involves your thumb, okay? And by the way, the reason it does that is because the number system, or American Sign Language, is actually kind of a descendant of French Sign Language, not British Sign Language, which is a totally different language. And so we borrowed the counting system from French as opposed to British, and that's how they count on their fingers there. Anyway, but in American Sign Language, there's a word for week, where it's almost like you're holding up, kind of like your hand, and then you swipe a finger across it, like it's going from one end to the other. And the word for month is the same thing, but you go from top to bottom. So the thing is, your hand can be in any shape. And so suddenly, just with one sign, there is a single word for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and so on. Same thing for months. So 1 month, 2 months, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And then you have the ability to push forward for the future or back for the past. So suddenly 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks from now, 4 months from now, and so on. All of these things are single words. It's almost like you can think of them as inflections. So the way that we can say, eat, eats, ate, eaten, and those are all inflections of one word. It is as if all of those words, 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks ago, all of them are inflections of the same word. There would never be a spoken language analog of that. It would make no sense, because it would be like, why would you do that? It'd be so pointless. But it's so natural in American Sign Language that it's like, why wouldn't you do that? And so that's something that's just really, really cool. So yes, good point. Absolutely throw any sign language in there, because there's going to be something in there you've never seen before.
Right. Cool. Wow.
I got so many questions, but they're going to be totally going off very separate from Star Wars. And I'm that one guy that, oh, you're the linguist. Can you answer everything for me?
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah,
I
well,
love
and
talking about language.
any other relevant questions, James? I know you got lots.
I don't know. I'm full of questions and I'm full of trivia. Yeah, did you know that there's also Hungarian in Star Wars in the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars micro series? He has an alien race, the Nilvanans, and they speak Hungarian as their language. And one of my Hungarian friends heard about it and picked up on it. And so the one word I know a few words in Hungarian. Tűz, which is the word for fire, is one because that's in that episode.
Are they actually speaking like translated Hungarian? Like, does it make sense? It's not just random strings of Hungarian words.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, because they're talking about fire when they say Tűz.
Okay.
But they are using Hungarian as the alien language, which amused the Hungarians.
Our brains are full, David. I want to thank you for everything you shared with us about your work and about languages in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Right on.
Kusanim.
There you go. Right on.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here as always. Nice talking to you.
That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, David Peterson, and we want to thank all of you for listening. If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies or know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram or at Star Warsologies, that's StarWarsologies @gmail.com. We also have a fan group on Facebook. It's cleverly named the Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group. So come and join the conversation. Please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service and share with your friends.
No topic is off limits, even whether banthas can swim.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including the flagship show, Skywalking Through Neverland. You can find this at skywalkingnetwork.com.
And if you're going to be at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2023, come out and see us. We will be there representing the Steam Pop Network. I will be moderating a panel called The Science of Superpowers.
And I will be moderating two panels, one on Andor, Becoming a Rebel, and Indiana Jones and the Nexus of Archaeology, History, and Punching Fascists. Come see us.
See you next time on Star Warsologies.
Comic-Con!
Comic-Con!